Hi, everyone. This discussion is related to food, local food, and local resilience in the context of climate change. And it's part of the Kildare PPN Climate Action Weekend of 2022. And I'm delighted to have here with me Evonne Boland and Cecilia Ramondetta, both of whom have an absolute wealth of experience around food, community engagement, involvement in sustainability, and lots of other issues. So I am going to let Cecilia maybe go first and introduce herself, and then Evonne.
That's great. So first of all, thank you for having me. Okay, we met in the context of a course on community resilience, and I was the tutor in there. I'll try to be brief. I have a lifelong interest in whatever happens in the world, a systemic level a lot of the time. And so all the interconnected social, economical, environmental issues that might arise, all on with this idea that we don't necessarily have to keep living the same story that we're telling ourselves right now. So I apply this to all my professional and volunteering hats that I wear from time to time, which are too long to mention now. So I'm delighted to be here.
Great, thank you. And Evonne, do you want to do a quick intro?
Sure, thanks, Cliona. So I'm living in Newbridge, and my background professionally is in financial services, but since I left that role 10 years ago now, and have been home based with my young kids, I've got a lot more involved in the community, and particularly around the area of sustainability, and the steps that we can take at a community level to really improve our outlook in terms of facing the challenges that are coming down the track around the climate crisis. And one of the pillars, I think, where we have a lot of opportunity there, to really change and improve things, is around food. So I've been involved in a number of local initiatives, but in the last 2 years, I guess, since the COVID crisis hit, I became involved in the Open Food Network, which I can talk a little bit more about later on, but ultimately it's an online platform that's designed to help local food producers distribute their food to local customers in a way that's transparent and fairly priced for them. So that's a really exciting initiative, and it's something that I'm hoping to spend more and more time on. I think it has a lot of potential, and I think there's potential there for communities to really make a difference, and hopefully I can play a small part in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two things there, like Cecilia, you touched on the systems thinking. And I suppose for me, over the summer, we had a lot of extreme weather events. We had droughts. We're looking at the flooding in Pakistan at the moment. And I think something that is missing in our conversations around climate is this joined up thinking. We're starting a little bit to talk about energy and possible sort of energy deficits and power cuts and so on. But I don't think we're really talking about food supply globally in the same way yet, which is why it's, bringing in that systems thinking. And Evonne, you're more of an expert on the whole food area. So in terms of the climate crisis or future food supplies, or even just in general in terms of resilience locally, like what is the importance of food?
You're asking me that?
Yes.
Yeah.
You want to come in?
So,
You can add as well if you want.
yeah, so what is the important? Well, food obviously is critical to our survival on Earth, and our food sovereignty, which is, our ability to feed ourselves, and to feed ourselves a nutritious and balanced diet, which is important in the Irish context. That's what really matters. And Ireland fares pretty badly in that regard. We've become very specialised in our agricultural production, so we're specialising predominantly in beef and dairy products, and that's not unusual. I mean, the incentives have pushed our agricultural sector in that direction, and it's not unusual for other economies around the world to specialise in a similar manner. But what it means is that the production then of other things that we consume and consider, as staple parts of our diet here, is happening elsewhere, and we are completely or almost completely dependent on imports for those. Notwithstanding the fact that we're also quite dependent on imported inputs for the production of that beef and dairy produce that I mentioned. So we're hugely, as a country, hugely exposed in terms of the food that we need to survive. And the numbers are quite shocking. If I was to tell you that almost half of the potatoes that we eat and consume in Ireland are imported, 2/3 of the vegetables that we eat are imported, 90% of our onions, for example, and 90% of the apples that are eaten or used in the country are also imported. And that's because the incentives that are there don't protect the horticultural sector and support it in the way they need to. The number of growers in the last 20 years has fallen from about, say, 400 to only 100. So, there's a massive crisis there in terms of the food production in Ireland, and as a result, our ability to feed ourselves a balanced and nutritional diet.
Yeah, those figures they're pretty shocking actually. I wasn't aware of some of those, especially the onions. It just seems astonishing, that we have such a capacity to grow things, yet we're importing. Cecilia, what would your view on this be in terms of sort of connecting food to how we live within communities, or in terms of sustainability as well, I suppose, because obviously, unsustainable agricultural practices have an impact on the land and the water and so on as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, of course, when you look at it from the system thinking point of view, you can't separate how you grow and what you grow and how you eat and what you eat, and in terms of health as well. Evonne made an excellent point that the diet, that there's a massive difference between feeding and nourishing a body. So it's not the same concept at all. So something that is eaten just to feel an emptiness is not the same as eating proper food. I suppose what we have created is a system that separates us from the food production side of our lives. And when those statistics become shocking is the point where I would see a disconnection between what we need to physically be alive and the people and all the structures that provide that, including, say, clean water or kind of clean air, and as a consequence also clean food. And we also have forgotten a lot about how hard it is to actually grow that food. It's not something that can be done overnight. And even trying to reclaim some of that sovereignty that Evonne was talking about, it won't happen, in the space of a month or even a year. It takes an awful lot of planning and thinking and rethinking the way we approach food production, just to mention one of the many areas that we can look at. and planning not for ourselves, but for our great grandchildren. So as some cultures would say, 6 generations from ours, because we are the ancestors of the future generations. And if we plan just to survive ourselves, in many ways, that does not ensure that the food production is sustainable and long term. And that is what's been happening. And that's because food has become goods rather than an essential part of survival. And so, you know, I suppose what we need is a different language to talk about the beings that support our life form in the form of plants and air and water and animals. And then it's a long process, but I have the feeling that once it starts, it would be incremental rather than, you know, exponential, sorry, not incremental, but exponential once it's kick-started, because at the end of the day, if you don't eat, you don't survive. So what could be done? There are so many different things that can be done, but from the point of view of the end user, so I don't like calling it consumer, but, you know, the end user, the person that goes and gets the food, to, if there is scope in your life, to just make an effort to find local producers, and as local as possibly can, and also in that context to support those that are creatively looking for a way to feed Ireland using Irish soil and Irish water and Irish air and so on. There are a lot of those already trying to do that. Not often will they make it to the supermarket shelves, so it takes a little bit of effort to find them. But even if you have a neighbor that has a few hens and you can help in the rearing of those hens, is already an excellent starting point. And I mentioned hens because protein would be an issue in the Irish diet if we didn't get enough feed for beef and dairy production. And that's a huge issue worldwide right now to support that. So hens are much lower in the animal protein chain. And it is not, the production of vegetable protein in Ireland is not widespread at the moment. So, you know, there would be a gap there between the needs and the actual production. And that's an area that I would love to see developed in this context of, you know, a balanced, nourishing diet. You need some protein, not a huge amount, but you need some, definitely. And, you know, creatively thinking about how to provide protein to people would be, for example, an area that needs an awful lot of development in Ireland. I hope that answers, you know, the two issues, yeah. Because, I mean, importing, people who eat chickpeas don't realize how many of the chickpeas are produced in specific places in the world. And, you know, there was this talk when the situation in Ukraine exploded, that a lot of those chickpeas come from Ukraine. And it's not a huge issue for our countries, but there are countries where chickpeas are a staple of the diet, and not being able to access them would create a huge problem with hunger.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, it's all when I talked about interconnecting systems and levels of the system, there's an element of food justice.
Yes, absolutely.
And so the idea that to buy local, I have to spend 10 times the money that I spend to buy imported foodstuff, creates immediately, a huge imbalance. So there are so many different points of view that you can start looking at, you know, at the same problem. But essentially, I always say something that does not abuse any other part of the system would be an excellent kind of pair of glasses to wear when you talk about sustainability. So you can either look at it from the point of view of humans, or you know, or other beings, or social class, or economic power. It doesn't matter where you start from, but if you try to minimize the abuse in any part, then you have a very good starting point for addressing the issue.
Yeah, I suppose it is, yeah, it's very much the interconnectedness. And there are globally just as issues around food and access to food. And in Ireland, I think sometimes there is a perception that buying sort of fresh local, you kind of mentioned that it might be more expensive, which often isn't the case. If you can buy locally, it often isn't more expensive. There is just maybe this idea. And maybe Yvonne, because obviously you have a huge amount of experience through the Open Food Network. Do you think people maybe have a perception, like, is that kind of a barrier for people, that there is a little bit of a perception that maybe it's too expensive to be going to something like the Open Food Network or to a farmer's market?
Yeah, certainly it is a factor. And sometimes it's a perception, as you say, and sometimes it's very real. And it may not be in the final price that you see that difference, but if it means you have to add an extra journey to your shopping plans, or you have to buy a different quantity, or if it means that you have to prepare food from fresh, and maybe you don't have the facility to do that. Shopping differently from your supermarkets and processed foods and things like that can imply extra costs, and that is absolutely and a very valid barrier to many people, and it's something that absolutely needs to be addressed. The question of food equality, and we need to start asking ourselves why people who are struggling in terms of paying their supermarket bills, why food support comes so often in the form of pot noodles and packet soups, and why we don't afford those people the same access or the rights to nutritious foods as well. So, like, it is very complex, and normally I do balk at the suggestion that we all as individuals hold all the solutions to our challenges and problems. This tendency that can be to individualize everything, but actually, in terms of food, as consumers, we have quite a bit of power in terms of changing this situation. And actually, a lot of the challenges that are there, they boil down to consumer behavior and consumer demand. And what we really need to start thinking about is the consumer as a citizen, and every euro that you spend on food being almost a vote, as they say, for the system that you want. And we really need to think about those choices that we're making as consumers, food consumers, and we really need to be massively committed if we're going to change this. There's no denying it; it's not easy. We need to think about how we're our own tastes. There's the cereal situation, for example. The cereal that we import so much of it from Ukraine and other countries. It's to meet consumer taste, consumer preference for certain types of breads, for example, and it's not because it's not because we can't grow cereals here. We're just maybe not able to grow, or as easily, the right ones, the ones that are in fashion. And we need to think about changing those tastes, changing our priorities as consumers. There's massive challenges around convenience. If how do you compete? Like in Newbridge, for example, we have 5 massive supermarkets here. How is the farm gate going to compete with that? You know, we're totally divorced from seasonality as well due to the retail offering. If you suggest to people that they shouldn't be buying maybe strawberries in January, not everybody will understand why that's an issue. But it is, and you know, that's driving the need for supermarkets to have the shelves filled with a wide variety of fruits, exotic fruits, any time of the year. And yeah, we need to realize that this is important. It's really important. It's worth inconveniencing ourselves. It's worth paying extra if we can, and it's really worth questioning those choices that we're making every day. But the system is stacked against us. It is, absolutely. You know, it's stacked against us as consumers. It's stacked against producers. The centralization of the whole distribution system has meant that producers are very distanced from their consumers, and they've lost a lot of autonomy and control, and they're dependent on what the supermarket wants to stack on its shelves. You know, the shape and size of the vegetables that they accept or don't accept. And the messaging, even, you know, what consumers want or don't want, it's filtered always through the supermarket. And these massive distribution chains, while, you know, they're, you know, clearly efficient, they're really, I think, tearing the heart out of our food system, our food economies, and they're disenfranchising us as consumers and the producers as well, you know. So that's part of the infrastructure. That's the infrastructural context, I suppose, that's making it difficult for us to change things. And that's where I suppose the need for OFN was identified, and that's where we see an opportunity for small producers to take control back again of that key element, which is their delivery, their route to market, and also an opportunity for consumers and communities to take more control over their own local food system, and really make changes on the ground that can have a real impact for their own local food network and building their community resilience in that area.
Thanks, Evonne. It's you know, it's a hugely complex area, obviously, but I suppose to like completely simplify it, there's the two sides. There's the consumer awareness or knowledge around all of these issues, and then there are the policies, which, as you say, the system is stacked against producers and the way everything is set up. So like, are there sort of policy changes that you would like to see, or is there a way you think people could be, maybe, I don't know, educated or encouraged more to shop locally?
Okay, well, I'm not an expert on agricultural policies, but I know that they're massively problematic in the sense that they're driving this, you know, specialization, and not supporting the types of production we would like to see. But there's also practices around you know, below cost selling, for example, and you know, your bag of carrots for 49 cents, you know, that has to stop. It really has to stop. And you know, I think that needs to be a legislative change that's made, and that those kind of practices need to be outlawed, because they're doing nobody any favors. And I know it's difficult at this time, you know, of cost of living crisis and so on, to talk about things like that. And obviously people need to be supported properly to have access to healthy food. But we're spending less than we ever spent in terms of our household percentage of our household income on food, and that's you know, that it's symptomatic, I suppose, of the lack of value we're putting on food, the lack of value we put on the the challenges that producers face. You know, Cecilia mentioned some of the difficulties, but there's huge challenges for producers. They take on huge risk when it comes to growing food. And at the moment they shoulder it themselves, unless they're part of community supported agriculture systems, things where consumers buy into that risk by paying a subscription on a yearly basis, and they you know, support the grower. So I'd love to see initiatives like that more supported. I'd love to see communities supported in terms of you know, organizing themselves and taking control and using the tools that are there, and properly supported. I mean, you know, with investment and paying people's wages on the ground who are doing important jobs in our communities, providing space to grow, and space then to meet and to hold their markets or their distribution hubs or whatever way they want to do it. Supports then for things like cooperatives, community ownership, you know, of those means of production and distribution. Those types of things that, you know, it's not rocket science, and there are really good examples out there, internationally, especially of these types of initiatives. And I think we really need to get with the program and start, you know, giving meaningful support for these types of really important initiatives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm going to go on to Cecilia in a minute, but just this idea of community and food as well. And I know I used to go to the Newbridge, the cottage market, and it was always a lovely community space as well. And food could be so sociable, and so, you know, there's such a human quality to it as well. And I suppose in terms of kind of community resilience in general and the role that communities have to play in sustainability, Cecilia, maybe, you know, you could talk a little bit about that, because, you know, you did the community resilience course, and I you know, I just think it is so crucial that we become a lot more self-sustaining as communities, you know, in terms of owning our own energy, growing our own food, having plans in place for sort of extreme weather events, because, you know, there are a lot of things coming down the line that people really are not prepared for at all. So how do we now start building those networks and that resilience?
I'll talk about that in a second. I would add to what Evonne said, the right to own seeds and share seeds, which is now not in, like, we cannot buy seeds unless it's from a registered company in a seed sort of, there is a European law, so it's illegal to sell seed all over Europe unless you're one of those companies. So I will use the metaphor of the seeds. It's not a metaphor, it's a really practical problem. But again, I love storytelling. So, you know, when you look at a seed and the community has the power or the skill to actually preserve seed for itself without having to sell it, you know, you're taking control of a huge part of what community resilience looks like. So in many ways, community resilience means a huge work of empowerment of people as individuals and as groups to understand what it means to, like, I call it survival, but it's a full life. Okay, so, you know, beginning with the needs of the body, and then moving on to the needs of the spirit, that you cannot really separate. Yes, but I think one of the biggest steps is for a community to have a story about itself. As in, when you talk about resilience, the issues are so big that the step to despair is fairly immediate. Okay, and you might remember, but I use the word that reconnects a lot in my life and in my teachings. And there is an element of accepting the despair but not stopping there. And so despair is a natural reaction to what we're seeing at community level. And despair can look like denial or not wanting to be involved in community level. So it doesn't have to be somebody kind of pulling their hair out and crying in the street. The lack of engagement is also a measure of the disempowerment that the human part of a community might feel in the face of such huge issues and what's coming down the line, as you were rightly saying. So creating a story that we can start sharing with children and using whatever resources present in the local community, whether we solve the problem or not, whether we create a truly resilient small community, even that little bit of saying it can be done. And some of the pathways to doing this are, have a look at our food supply. Where does it come from? Are we grateful for that? Do we actually thank the farmers or the growers that are on our doorstep for what they do? So it doesn't all boil down to money. It boils down to something that has a lot more value than the actual price that we put on things, because that's a huge issue in language. Because when we put a price on things, we don't know the value of what we have in our hands. And so the 49-cent bag of carrots is automatically devaluing what we're holding in our hands. And not only that, but everything that brought that bag of carrots into our hands also gets immediately devalued in our eyes because the price on it is so low. So even starting to look at the way we address these issues in our community, and for the way we address, I talk about language. So how do we speak about this? Who am I when I eat something? Am I a consumer? So what is a carrot? Is it a resource? Okay, what is it? Because that implies a relationship of buyer and seller, and so something that depends entirely on money. But chances are that if really we look at if these systemic cracks actually open up and split open at some point, chances are that the issue of money will be huge, in that there will be no money, or the system that supports the money system might fail. Okay, so in that context, again, a resilient community would know where to go to get valuable things like carrots, potatoes, onions. And that doesn't have to be production on a massive scale, because some of these things don't need a huge amount of land, but they do need a huge amount of skill. So you're talking about re-empowering people to see for themselves, creating stories with a language that create a different way of seeing things, and reskilling. So relearning a few things that I am convinced we know how to do, but because they don't have value, because they don't add money to our life, we put aside. And then creating celebration and creating great gratitude in the community. And then we will realize that, a lot of the supporting systems are still there. Yeah, there is still soil in the ground. It might not be the best quality soil, but it hasn't gone. And there's still water and there's still air. And to an extent, we can interact with these in a way that makes us, able to survive even fairly harsh living conditions. Humans are very resilient, in themselves. Now, we have survived an awful lot in our history, in the past. And Irish people are super resilient in their mindset. Okay, it's only a very recent part of our history, but where we lost that. So we haven't forgotten. And so, and then looking at things like energy production and, localizing energy production, what does it even look like? So creating models for what that might look like without getting lost in the model, and creating the model and testing it out and see, does it work? Yeah, immediately, so you can make corrections pretty much as you create the model. Because in times of transition, we know where we're coming from more or less, but we really don't know where we're going to. And that's the core of resilience. It means that faced with the unknown, we have enough skills and creativity. It's a matter of creativity to face up into the unknown. And nobody knows really what was going to happen. Yeah, we don't know what shape it will take. Nobody ever knows. But if the community is creative enough to be able to support itself in shifting, yeah, the focus of attention, then chances are the community will survive. So I know it sounds abstract, but in terms of, like, if you look at food production, again, how do we name or label the things that we eat? And how do we acknowledge what went into making them? Do we acknowledge them at all, you know? And that means if I have somebody that is able to grow herbs in my local estate, okay, can I, with gratitude, go and ask them to teach me how to grow those herbs? Because that means that the whole estate, you don't need a huge amount of herbs to supply an estate. Yeah, and then so if we don't have salt, then at least we have some flavor that we can put into food. Okay, the sugar taste is going to be a bit trickier, but there are crops that are very that are not that intensive. Okay, they don't need a huge amount. Okay, so even empowering smaller pieces of the community to look after those and leave the big land kind of masses to provide the cereals, for example. Yeah, so it would shift completely the whole food supply chain. Okay, because I can look at things differently. I don't need to outsource everything, and I don't need to be good at everything. Yeah, so that's a story that tells me that I can do something which is empowering and is creative. What is it I can do, and where can I learn it? And putting all those pieces together, and that goes for food or for everything else, really. Energy a bit trickier, of course, you know, but but you can adopt the same mindset.
Yeah.
Quite quickly, actually. You don't need, and it doesn't need a huge amount of effort to do this, actually. You know, it just doesn't. It's not a huge step, you know, it's not something that we can't conceive of, that is so far out, you know, that it's unachievable.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is about changing a mindset, I suppose, and you know, just having economics as the only value on everything is so dehumanizing, and really just contributes to that sense of disconnect, I think, that we all have, you know. And I mean, it's so true. You know, you can barter and share produce locally in your estate or with your neighbors, or, you know, there's so many ways to actually kind of connect and, you know, engage with your neighbors in a really positive way. So I think that's, yeah, it's really important. I am conscious of time, and we probably should finish up. So thank you both so much. You know, it's such a fascinating area, and the food especially. I think we could talk forever on this, to be honest. But maybe we'll do another panel again. So just to finish off, are there? I'll let each of you give your final thoughts, or I don't know. Yeah, like what you think we should do, or what you find helps you to kind of deal with all the sustainability stuff, or I'll leave it up to you. So, Evonne, do you want to go?
Yeah, just to reiterate, and contradict myself a little bit, I think, just to reiterate that people, we all have a lot of power to drive change. Every time we spend money on food and make food choices, and it's difficult, but I'd urge people to start taking note of where the food they're buying is coming from, and try and inform themselves around issues like seasonality, what's in season at different times of the year, and start thinking about that at least while you're doing your shopping. And then, in almost contradiction of that, I'd like to really urge people to organise in their communities, come together. That's where you can really make a difference. Come together around food. There are programs out there at the moment, as we know, for community energy, and we need similar around community food. You need to know where food is being produced in your locality. You need to be part of that if you can. Community gardens, all of that, wonderful, wonderful projects, and try to establish an infrastructure locally. It can be a very simple thing like a food market or an online hub or whatever it might be, something that helps to support that network, helping to support your local growers and helping people in your own community who are interested to access that food. So we really can do so much to affect change in this area, and it's, as Cecilia said, it's not wild stuff. Even the energy questions can be a bit daunting. It's complex, energy production. Food is far more manageable, understandable, for people. So I'd really encourage people to try and make those changes, and check out the Open Food Network as well. And I'd love to talk to anybody who's interested, separately. Don't hesitate to get in touch. Thanks a lot.
Great, thanks, Evonne. Cecilia, final words from you.
I say that what helps me a lot is the practice of gratitude and putting myself in the chain of food. So when I eat something, I sometimes stop and try and really visualize what that is coming from and where it's going to after I've eaten it. And that helps me, it grounds me a lot in what Evonne is saying, because, it's not always easy to find the kind of food that I would consider sustainable. But these two habits, if you want, ground me into thinking that if I buy a bit less, sometimes it's okay. Or if I really look at what I'm eating, and it's really looking, not even thinking about it, but looking at what I'm eating, there is a lot of beauty in that. And I am not separated from that. So it takes an awful lot of effort, because we are all being reared in the same mentality. So that's not that immediate, but it's something that I have found it helps me a lot in making food choices. As abstract as it sounds and absurd as it sounds, gratitude and not consciously trying to see myself in the chain of food, in the food chain, helps me when I go and pick something up when I'm food shopping.
Yeah, no, that's great. I like that. And I suppose, yeah, connecting with food, connecting with growers and making those choices as consumers is so key. And it is something very empowering, because we all have the ability to do that, I suppose. So on that note, thank you both so much, and hopefully we'll chat again about this topic. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks.